Hi, I'm Gordon from Camera Labs, and this is my first looks review of Canon's PowerShot G5X Mark II, a high-end compact camera with a 20 megapixel 1-inch sensor, a 5x 24:120mm zoom, pop-up viewfinder, tilting touchscreen, fast burst shooting and 4K video. Announced in mid-2019, it comes 3 years after the original G5X and adapts its design to become closer to Sony's popular RX100 series. It costs £849, roughly similar to that of the Sony RX100 5A, and £130 more than Canon's own G7X Mark III. I had a chance to try out the G5X Mark II and learn more about it at an official Canon press preview, so in this video I'll tell you everything I know so far, but do keep an eye open for my full review which will follow and go into way more detail. The G5X Mark II was also launched alongside the G7X Mark III, and I've got a video all about that model too. The basic concept follows the same formula as its predecessors, namely to deliver better quality than your phone while remaining pocket-sized. This is achieved using a larger 1-inch sensor coupled with a bright lens, a combination that can actually roughly match a basic DSLR or mirrorless camera when fitted with a standard f3.5 to 5.6 kit zoom. It's this combination of quality and size that makes 1-inch compacts so popular and why Canon carries so many in its range. Unlike the G7X Mark III, which looks almost identical to its predecessor, the G5X Mark II has been completely redesigned. Here's the original G5X Mark I on the left and the new G5X Mark II on the right. As you can see, Canon's dumped the mini DSLR design with its viewfinder hump, bigger grip and flip screen, and gone for something much closer to Sony's RX100 series with a vertically tilting screen and pop-up viewfinder. These modifications allow it to be much more pocketable than before, despite now actually also sporting a slightly longer zoom range than before. If you want a mini DSLR styled upgrade from the original G5X, Canon's clearly steering you towards its flagship PowerShot G1X Mark III, which sports the viewfinder hump, flip screen, chunkier grip and front control dial, but packs a 24 megapixel APS-C sensor, crucially with dual pixel AF, making it the only model in the PowerShot G series with confident phase detect autofocus, not to mention weather sealing. I'd love to see an upgraded version of the G1X Mark III with 4K video and a microphone input. Who's with me? Returning to the lens, rather than inheriting the G7X's 4.2x zoom again, Canon's developed a brand new 5x zoom for the G5X Mark II, equivalent to 24 to 120mm, while maintaining the bright f1.8 to 2.8 focal ratio. The aperture closes to f2 at 27mm, then to f2.2 at 34mm, f2.5 at 44mm, and to the minimum f2.8 from 68mm all the way to 120mm. The closest focusing is 5cm at the wide end and 20cm at the long end, and I'm pleased to report the built-in neutral density filter remains available. The key benefit of the G5X over the G7X remains the built-in viewfinder, although on the Mark II it now employs a pop-up design like the Sony RX100 models for a more compact body. Like those Sony models, you'll need to manually pop it up for use, although you'll also need to pull out the housing by hand, something that Sony's resolved with the latest RX100 Mark VI with its one-touch viewfinder mechanism. As for the viewfinder itself, it remains a 2.3 million dot OLED panel for a small but detailed and steady view. The grip on the redesigned body is obviously smaller than before, and the Mark II also loses the useful front control dial of its predecessor, but there's still plenty to hold on to here, and it's much easier to grip than the smooth, flat-fronted Sony RX100 models. The touchscreen shares the same tilting mechanism as the G7X Mark III, so it'll angle down by about 45 degrees or up by 180 to face you for selfies or vlogging. The side hinge screen of the original G5X allowed greater flexibility, particularly when shooting in the portrait orientation, but it was sacrificed here for thickness. Now, if you do love that side hinge screen, it's still available on the higher end G1X Mark III, but the important thing here is the G5X still lets that screen flip up to face you again for selfies or vlogging. In terms of connectivity, the G5X Mark II is equipped with USB-C and micro HDMI, the latter delivering a clean output and the former supporting USB charging and hopefully also power delivery. I'll confirm that later. There's also of course Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, although the G5X II sadly lacks the microphone input and YouTube live streaming capabilities of the G7X Mark III. Why can't we have it all? The G5X Mark II and G7X Mark III become Canon's first 1-inch compacts to use a stacked CMOS sensor. It has the same 20 megapixel resolution as before, but much faster readout, allowing uncropped 4K video at 25 or 30p, 1080 video up to 120 frames per second for slow motion, a fast 25,600th of a second electronic shutter option, and quick burst shooting, recording up to 118 JPEGs at up to 20 frames per second, or up to 70 compressed CR3 RAWs at 30 frames per second in a new RAW burst mode. If any of this sounds roughly familiar, it's because Sony introduced stacked 1-inch sensors 4 years earlier on the RX100 Mark IV, and I'm guessing it's probably the same sensor here. Sadly, it's not the more recent sensor used in the RX100 Mark V though, which added phase detect autofocus, as the G5X Mark II remains contrast-based for autofocus, but the faster shooting and in particular better quality video are still valuable upgrades here. Looking at video in more detail, the G5X Mark II will film 10-minute uncropped 4K clips at 25 or 30p, or half-hour 1080 clips at 25, 30, 50 or 60p, and all of those with sound and continuous autofocus. High-speed 1080 video is also available at 100 or 120p, but without sound or focusing, and the files are automatically slowed for playback. Wherever I looked in the menus though, I just couldn't find any 24p video options, which is a shame, but at least we now have uncropped 4K on the Canon, and the 10-minute clip length for 4K is double that of Sony's RX100 models. Wrapping up the other features are a menu system that more resembles EOS cameras with identical sharpening in the picture styles, focus bracketing although not stacking in camera, and a star mode which can now generate 4K videos. And now for the final summary. The Canon PowerShot G5X Mark II is a powerful compact camera with a 20 megapixel 1-inch sensor, 5x 24-120mm zoom, pop-up viewfinder, tilting touchscreen, fast burst and 4K video. Canon's made a U-turn on design, swapping the chunkier DSLR styling of its predecessor for something more pocketable and more akin to Sony's RX100 series. So it's out with a fixed viewfinder hump and side hinge screen for a pop-up viewfinder and a vertically tilting display. The grip has shrunk and the front dial lost, but there's still more to hold onto than the RX100, and the changes have allowed the G5X to become more pocketable than before. This does, however, bring it closer to the G7X Mark III, with Canon essentially asking you to choose between the pop-up viewfinder and slightly longer 5x zoom of the G5X Mark II, versus the microphone input and live streaming of the G7X Mark III. Couldn't we just have it all in one body instead, or perhaps do identical versions with and without viewfinders to meet different price points? There's also tough competition from Sony's RX100 5A, which gives you the pop-up viewfinder, tilting screen, 4K video and fast bursts, but with the benefit of more confident phase detect autofocus. Although in its favour, the G5X Mark II zooms almost twice as long, while also sporting a touchscreen and better grip. Overall, the G5X Mark II loses much of what made its predecessor unique in the 1-inch market, and leaves anyone desiring a mini DSLR style compact to aim for the G1X Mark III instead. But by aligning it more closely to its best-selling rival, the G5X Mark II becomes more attractive to a bigger audience, and I understand that makes sense for Canon. But imagine how much more popular it could have been merged with the G7X Mark III's connectivity. I'd have loved to see that microphone input and YouTube live streaming on all of the new models. Right, that's it for this first looks video. I hope you found it useful. Don't forget to check out my final review of the G5X Mark II, and of course for more information visit cameralabs.com. Which only leaves me to ask you to generously give me a like and a follow, and as always, if you found any of it useful, you can treat me to a coffee or yourself to a copy of my in-camera book. Thanks for watching, let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.